Great. Well, then let's get started. I think we have lots of people online already and we don't want to keep you waiting. So I'm Sarah Batty. I'm Vice Chair of the British Chamber, and I'd like to welcome you very warmly to today's Leadership Forum event. This is the third of 5 really great events this week. And if you were able to join us for the first 2 events, you'll know that we've had some really engaging and really interesting speakers looking at change and uncertainty from a number of different angles. Today we have Marcus Muller with us, who will be teaching us all about how to navigate in uncharted territory using the ABC compass. And Jill Saville will be actually leading us through that event. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Alta Domus and Lux States, for their very generous support of the whole week, in fact. And I'd also just very quickly like to point out that our speaker for tomorrow, Paulette Lehnert, she will now be speaking at 7 p.m. So if you were planning to join, it was originally scheduled for 5 p.m. She can't make it at 5, but will be with us at 7 p.m. So we hope to see you for that event as well. So on that note, I hope you have a very good session today and enjoy yourself. I'm sure you will. Marcus is a great speaker. And I will hand over to Jill to get us started.
So I just want to say a quick word, because unfortunately Lena Peterson was going to lead this today, so I'm a stand-in, and Lena is unwell today, the dreaded COVID, we hope not, and but we hope that you get well soon, Lena. So it's therefore my unexpected pleasure to introduce Marcus Muller. He is a professor at Sacred Heart University, and he's no stranger to the Chamber because, in fact, he spoke at the Leadership Forum last year. He's an organisational psychologist and teaches on the MBA programme. And in 2017, he was awarded as the most engaging and motivated professor, which is quite an accolade. He's a researcher, has written several papers, including the 2019 Show Me the Money, which is towards an economic model for a cost-benefit analysis of employee engagement interventions. He's also the founder of the ABC Vitamin Approach, and that, in fact, is the subject of today. So the full title is Navigating in Uncharted Territory, the ABC Compass. So I'd like to now hand over to Marcus Muller.
Thank you very much, Jill. In 2011, the US company Western Digital was one of the world market leaders in manufacturing hard disk drives. They had 38,000 employees at the time, and the key success factor they based their competitive advantage on was the cleanliness in manufacturing. There was a cost advantage, and it was clear that any particle inside was the key success factor, that any particle inside would crash a drive. And they were very good at doing that at very low cost. And at the time in 2011, 50% of their supply chain was actually dependent, their global supply chain was actually dependent on one plant in Thailand. It was the Ayutthaya plant, about 70 kilometers north of Bangkok. In October 2011, Thailand experienced devastating floodings, affecting millions of people, millions of homes, millions of lives. And in fact, on the 15th of October of 2011, the Western Digital manufacturing plant in Ayutthaya flooded. 2 meters high, and so did Western Digital employees' homes in the entire region. And when the experts came in a couple of days later, they estimated it would take roughly 7 to 8 months for Western Digital to clean up the plant. And it would take $1 billion in restoration costs. And it would take years to get to full capacity again, because the high-end manufacturing machines would take years to replace. And based on that judgment, some people even suggested, and a lot of analysts suggested at the time, that this might well be the end of Western Digital. So circumstances can change moment by moment, very quickly. We've seen this in Chernobyl. We've seen this with 9/11. We've seen it in the financial crisis, Fukushima, and now we see COVID-19. the world was one way, one moment, and it will be and it's totally different in another moment. So things changing moment by moment. But what hasn't changed, even though circumstances have changed on a regular basis, is people. People have not changed. People have been the same for 50,000 years. And you might say, yeah, we are wearing these ties and these suits and we look very rational and professional today. But on the inside, we haven't changed in 50,000 years. We could say we've got ourselves out of the Stone Age, but the Stone Age is still within us. And there's a mismatch now, because what we see is that genetic codes update in tens of thousands of years, but Apple updates on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. So there is a gap opening up between who we are and what we do. And this mismatch accounts for a lot of misunderstandings in the workplace and the misunderstanding of people. So there's a huge gap opening up between who we are and what we do. Give you an example. We crave for sweet things because they were rare for our ancestors. We eat more than we actually need as an expression of provisioning. Stress was a survival mechanism for our ancestors, maybe once a month when chased by a saber-toothed tiger or fighting a mammoth. Today, it happens multiple times a day. So it's turned from a survival mechanism into a killer. So therefore, in life in general, it's good advice to understand how we function as human beings, because our instincts can kill us. And therefore, we need to recognize and pay attention to our nature. And this is particularly important when we turn from life in general to business, where we not only deal with ourselves, where we deal mostly with other people. Because in business, 100% of employees are people. 100% of customers are people. 100% of clients, suppliers, executives are people. So if we want to understand business, we need to understand people. And the core mechanism of understanding people is that our brain has two distinct parts that decides over our behavior in response to situations, specific situations like danger or crisis. There's one part, I call it the executive brain, that stands for rational, creative, collaborative, constructive behavior. On the other side, you have the instinctive brain. The instinctive brain is erratic, lost, egoistic, selfish, fighting, fleeing. So what happens when a signal or a piece of information comes in? What happens is the two parts start fighting. So the executive brain is fighting the instinctive brain for whoever wins. It goes to either side in terms of the behavior. There are about 50,000 research studies by now that show that there are three distinct feelings that energize the executive brain in this fight with the instinctive brain. And they're called autonomy, belonging, and competence. That's the ABC. So in hundreds of studies in the late 60s and early 70s, and by now in over 50,000 studies across disciplines, health, education, sports, politics, and more recently, work and organizations, those three feelings have been identified as the core feelings that energize our rational brain in the fight against the instinctive brain. Let me briefly go through that, what it actually means. Autonomy means that people feel they have some discretion over what they do, how they do it. They have some say. They play a role in what they do and how they do it. Belonging means they feel part of something. They feel accepted. They feel supported. And competence means that people feel that they have abilities that help them to overcome challenges and to contribute to their own lives and to the lives of others. So when I first came in contact with the ABC, or the general science behind it, it wasn't actually called the ABC at the time. In 2007, my core question when I visited the founders at the University of Rochester was, this is all fine and dandy, but my question was, why did they actually find A, B, and C, and not X, Y, and Z? And I went on a long search, and I actually had to go outside my discipline, and I had to get into anthropology to solve that puzzle. And at the end of that discovery was that when people tried to survive in the Stone Age, when they were facing the saber-toothed tiger, the mammoth, the bear, adverse conditions, and so on, droughts, they were looking around for help because they couldn't survive on their own. They didn't have claws. They didn't have the size of a mammoth, the claws of a tiger, and so on. So they were looking around for help. And here it was. There was a group of people, a group of 4, and what happened then is the same what happens today. The group is asking themselves, scratching their heads, asking themselves in terms of talent management, maybe we would need someone to throw a spear or who can run fast, to build shelter, to carry loads, to nurse children. And they are looking around and they see this one person, and the one person says, oh, I'm actually looking for a group. So they start an interview process and they get talking. And at some point the group says, oh, this is interesting, that makes sense. And the person says, yeah, okay. So the person joins the group, so it becomes a group of 5. Now, the question then is, that explains the person is contributing competence, and at the same time, the group is giving the person belonging. So you're contributing skills, and you're getting shelter, you become part of something, you become an accepted member of the group. They're supporting you, they care for you, they help you survive. The key question then is, where does autonomy come into the game? And this has to do with our species. Our species is different from any other species on this planet insofar as we have a self. We can recognize our identity. And every single one of you has experienced when you are at an event and you're standing around with people. Some people stand closer, some people stand further away. Sometimes they come too close, you feel like you want to move away from them. Sometimes they are far away, you want to get closer. This is a way of describing what your self does. You're trying to either protect yourself or you want to bring yourself closer to the other. So the autonomy means you're protecting yourself. You want to maintain your identity as part of the group. So it's this constant process of the individual and the group in how far the individual becomes a fully internalized, what we call it in science, fully internalizes the rules, regulations, values, everything of the group, or preserves some identity. And most people do want to preserve some identity, some self, and don't want to get fully absorbed into the group. So this explains the ABC. But then the next question is, where does the mental vitamins approach come from? When I started doing my first research studies in 2008, I had to recruit participants for my studies, for surveys, for interviews, qualitative research. And one of the challenges I had, and this is why most psychology research starts in the health and education professions, it's because participants cannot run away. That is different for participants in work and organizations. You have to convince the management or at least the department head that it's worth spending time on when their people spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour on a survey or in an interview. So the technical term in psychological ways for the ABC, autonomy, belonging, and competence, is called basic psychological needs or basic psychological needs satisfaction. So I was, fully enthusiastic about the approach these companies. Took me 3 months to set up a meeting with the CEO of that company to recruit people from his organization. And then the moment after 5 minutes, I mentioned what my research was all about. And I said, it's about basic psychological needs and need satisfaction. And it was like a revolving door. It took me 3 months to get in, but only 5 minutes to get out. because people were just, we don't have time for that. That's just too technical, it's too scientific, it's not practical, we're just not interested. So that was the time when I started looking around for a packaging, a wrapping, marketing, promotion of this scientific concept. And I came up with mental vitamins because vitamins is an aspect of our physical body, and that's why everybody gets it. If we have enough vitamins, we're fully functional. If we don't have enough vitamins, we have some physical issues, maybe cramping in the muscles or something like that. It's exactly the same analogy with mental vitamins. If you do have enough mental vitamins, then your executive brain with all the positive things is functioning. If you don't have enough, it's overpowered by the instinctive brain, and you have the cramping of the brain, basically. You have the cramping of all the dysfunctions that can happen in your life: fight, flight, irrational behavior, and so on and so forth. So that's when the whole thing actually took off in the work in the organizational area, because the mental vitamins ABC approach was something that was acceptable, that people understood and could buy into. Now, when communication, when information enters through the 5 senses, through mostly communication, it's basically the fight between the instinctive and the executive brain, is the executive brain being powered by the ABC. But what's powering the instinctive brain is uncertainty, any type of uncertainty, which is obviously huge in a time of that we call crisis. So it's huge uncertainty, but uncertainty has become, in the times we live in, has become a part of life, so to speak. So what you have to do, and that's why I call it the ABC compass, is in everyday life, as well as, especially, and that's especially true in crisis situations, is use the ABC for communication. Because that makes people feel safe, and it makes people use their executive brain and not their instinctive brain. And I want to give you an example. A couple of weeks into the crisis here in Luxembourg, I came across a company, and I talked to a company, and they had just issued, a couple of weeks into the pandemic, some internal communication. And the internal communication was, I'm not going to read it word by word to you. I'm not going to cite it, but it was roughly along the lines of, it was something like, to all employees, we've been suffering from the pandemic. We've all been suffering from the pandemic. Our executive team has worked tirelessly on evaluating all options to stabilize the situation and ensure serving our customers. Difficult decisions with regards to our employees may be necessary. We have developed a set of procedures in response to COVID-19, which you can find attached to this communication. Please follow instructions as outlined to contribute to the survival of our company. So through the lenses of the ABC, it's a big downer for autonomy, because it's very controlling and instructing. There's a lack of empathy. It's a big downer for belonging, and it's excluding employees from the identification of solutions. It's just shoveling down regulations down their throat, which is a big downer for competence. So this communication was a downer for all 3 mental vitamins, A, B, and C. And when I talked to employees in the days after the memo was sent out, the general message was, the company doesn't care about us. So why should we care about the company? But here's what Western Digital did and how they communicated in 2011, when their plant got flooded. To all the members of our Ayutthaya community, they wrote to the employees in a memo: all of you have been heavily affected by the flooding. Your homes, your families, your friends. Management has decided to continue to pay all of you to provide a stable foundation for rebuilding your lives. With regards to the factory, we need your help and expertise in cleaning up, restoring, and resuming operations. Our management team will be on site to work side by side with you. Let's care for each other, was the end of the memo. Totally different message, right? It's an invitation to contribute, boosting autonomy, management working side by side, getting their hands dirty, shoulder to shoulder with you, being part of something, big belongingness booster. And we need your help in working out solutions. We need your contribution, big booster of competence. So what happened? Western Digital employees left their flooded homes and came to help at the factory. One employee's idea, whose brother was in the Navy, was to bring in Navy divers to unbolt the heavy machinery from the shop floor to bring it outside for cleaning. People slept and ate at the factory for weeks. You remember the prediction was that it would take 7 months and it would cost $1 billion to clean it up. 46 days after the flooding hit and only 15 days after the water receded from the factory floor, Western Digital resumed operations. The next fastest plant to open in the region took 6 months longer. Restoration costs were 200 million instead of $1 billion. And all 38,000 jobs at the time were saved. So I said before that crisis is just an extreme case of uncertainty that we face every day. Uncertainty is all around us every day. So we have mini crises basically every day. And that means that the ABC might be a compass in crisis, but it's also a compass in everyday organizational life. And in my experience, the situations I've been involved in, it's much more than a theoretical framework. It becomes, after a very short period of time, it becomes a communication tool. Because obviously, I said before, it's the 3 feelings. People hate to talk about feelings, especially in organizational contexts. So you have to build them a bridge. And the ABC represents that bridge. It wasn't designed that way, but this is how I have experienced it in my practical work, as well as in my classrooms with my students. After a very short period of time, because we want to share our feelings, because we are social beings, they use, this situation, it was a big upper for my B, or it was a big downer for my C. So they use that as a metaphor for their feelings. And this is how you get to the bottom of how people actually feel. And then once you know how people feel, then you can help them along to work with their executive brains instead of their instinctive brains. But it's not only a communication tool, it comes with one additional kicker. And that's it. That is an economic framework. In 2003, I worked for Merrill Lynch, and for them, I invested 280 million in a company in Europe. And I negotiated with the CFO at the time, and the numbers wouldn't work at the time. So I banged my fist on the table and I said to the guy, show me the money, get rid of people, restructure, fire departments. I don't care what you do. You have to show me the money. You have to show me the numbers. Otherwise, we're not having a deal here. And he did. So Merrill Lynch invested. We were both happy, made money, all fine. 10 years later, after my PhD, and after me leaving the industry in 2007, I was looking for participants for my study. So I called him up, the same person. By that time, he was the CEO of the company. And I said, can we meet? I'm in a new field. I'd like to talk to you. Yeah, come in. Let's chat. So I told him in glory terms how important people were, and that I wanted to investigate how the emotional component of it, and motivation, engagement, and everything else, and that I wanted to recruit several hundred people from his company for my study. And he looked at me and he said, excuse me, you know, those are not my words. Those were yours. Show me the money, because otherwise we're not in business here. Why should all these people spend time for your study? And I did. And I spent roughly 4 years of my life of developing an economic framework. It's called the EVA model, Economic Value Added Model, which basically allows you to calculate a return on investment on any type of people intervention. And it basically links the ABC to engagement. And there are 3 types of people in an organization linked to the ABC levels: people who create more value than they cost, people who create the same, roughly the same value as they cost, and people who destroy value or maybe even more than they cost. And you can link those 3 to the ABC, and you can see how the ABC is increasing, and you got an economic measure for it. It's been implemented now in about 25 different countries. I'm actually working with a platform. Now, I may use this low-tech thing. It's called motivationworks.com. It's a think tank down in Florida. Which is actually a software for people management, engagement, motivation. And it's been sold and promoted and implemented at companies like Google, Apple, Prudential, Warner, Johnson & Johnson. So it's been implemented in many parts. And since my publication in 2019, the ROI or economic model has also been included in that. So when you are, as I have been in many boardrooms, where you propose some people interventions, and then people say, yeah, but this all sounds fine and dandy, but you know, for this building and real estate project, we have an ROI of so-and-so. And for the software, we have an ROI of so-and-so. And for the machinery, we have a project, we have an ROI of so-and-so. What's your ROI on this people intervention? And this was usually the point when I or HR people or people managers or whoever was concerned with that in the company, when you were dead in the water. Now you can respond to that. And I can tell you the numbers have been flabbergasting. The number in my study was actually turned out to be a conservative one. It was a 1-year return on the people investment was 148%. But most of the interventions I've become aware of were far beyond 200% on the investment. So people might be the best investment for organizations after all. Let me come back to Western Digital. The flooding of Western Digital was basically the best thing that could have happened to them, because it was a huge bonding experience for the organization, not just for the plant, but for the entire organization. Within 12 months, they became the #1 in their market globally. They broke new records in volume and revenue. They took the gross margins from 20 to 30%, acquired another company, and remained profitable throughout the entire crisis. So what that story tells us is that how you handle a crisis situation provides a unique opportunity for shaping corporate culture. What may take months, maybe years in change management efforts can happen in a couple of days and weeks in a crisis. Why? Because what is costing most energy and what is causing most resistance in change management processes is employees asking, why change? And in crisis situations, that's bloody obvious. So you have no need to explain, and all the energy going into the resistance can be fueled looking for solutions and to come out on top on the other side of the crisis. I'd like to end my talk with my preferred quote from an organizational executive. His name is Bob Gorman. He's the chairman and CEO of Mueller, which is a US manufacturing company. They are manufacturing packaging companies down in St. Louis, around 10,000 employees. And they went through their own crisis in the financial crisis, 2008. And after that, he was interviewed and he said, companies are paying their employees for their hands, but the same employees would give them their heads and hearts for free if only companies knew how to ask. And the ABC is a language of human nature that enables organizations to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus. And all of the speakers have said the same thing. It's a shame that when you finish speaking, we can't just give you a round of applause. We'll try and do it at the very end, I think. So as I was listening, there were so many things that you were saying that fit in with other things that I've studied, and I can see people on the call who also studied different models. So I'm looking forward to their questions. From what you were saying, people are at the heart of everything, both in business and also as clients. Our brains need charging so that we executive part and not the part that goes to, in a crisis, this is even more important if I understand you. And also thank you very much for sharing your journey, because that was a journey of growth. You originally went into a company and said you've got to cut costs and everything else, and then you went back and said, actually, I got it wrong, let's do it differently. So thank you for sharing that story. So any questions, please put them in the chat. I know that I've got people saying food for thought. I've got Claudia on the line. I know that she's got a few questions, but please put your questions in the chat. So Claudia, have you got?
Yeah, Marcus, we now live in uncertain times, and when times are uncertain, budgets for training and employee engagement tend to be reduced. Should companies be doing the opposite? And if yes, is there any science to back that up?
The question is, what is the fundamental question you're asking is, what is actually the role of people in organizational performance and organizational life? And the sciences, as well as everything I see in practice, is that people are the last sustainable competitive advantage that organizations have. Everything else, apart from, and I go into culture in a second, but everything else, machinery, software, intellectual property, whatever you have, can be copied within an instant. Maybe you have to, it takes some money to buy or to replicate or to pay off. But what you cannot replicate is a culture. And what I mean by culture is having individuals which are unique, because there are as many unique individuals as we have individuals on the planet. Have a group of individuals and how they relate to each other. That is what I understand by culture. And this cannot be replicated. You cannot replicate the culture of Google. You cannot replicate the culture of a 25-person company, medium-sized company in Luxembourg. It's virtually impossible. So if you get it right, and the way I call it, I say, when people are not in a winning organization, people do not collaborate with each other. They ABC each other, because they have learned to give and take ABC from each other, continuously working with this executive brain, being constructive, looking for solutions. And that's what we need in the knowledge economy. What you are talking about, Claudia, is that there are still a number, and I would say it's the majority of companies out there, reducing investments in people, especially when it comes to crisis, but even in the ordinary course of business. This is related to, my view is, this has been related to two people. One is Frederick Winslow Taylor and his work, Scientific Management, in 1911, if I'm not mistaken, who wrote that people are just a resource and the process is more important and people don't matter because you can just take one person for another, for another, for another. And the second person is Milton Friedman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics and who has shaped the last 30 years of the 20th century like no one else in the business world with his principle of shareholder value. Those two people were the ones that shifted the focus away from people. It's hard to believe because most people would think, oh, Adam Smith as the founding father of capitalism. He was big on, he wrote on one page that the goal of a company is to maximize profits. But there's also a full page in his book on the wealth of nations talking about that profit maximization can only be achieved through people. And that people have to feel well, there's well-being, there's motivation, there is emotion, and so on and so forth. So I think the last 100 years have made the difference on this people, on this inhumane working environments. It's taken 30 years through Milton Friedman for us to get us into where we were at the beginning of the 21st century. But you can already see that times have been changing. And it might take another 15 or 20 years for the majority of people, of companies to see that they need to invest more in people. It's going to be a process. I have to be honest with you. I go around town, and not just in Luxembourg, and I still meet a lot of people that are very negative about people. When I tell them about people, they are like, yeah, but that people need to feel well in order to perform. They tell me, yeah, but we are not Club Med. Or do we need to hand them an armchair and an umbrella or something? But this is still of many senior executives. This is, they've spent all their life in a Taylorism free, in this shareholder value world. It's very difficult. I'm not a missionary. I'm not trying to convince them. I'm trying to concentrate on people that want change. So I'm concentrating on the younger generation of students and the second order executives in companies that want this change and will change it once they are in office, which might take, as I said, another 10 or 15 years.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience, and Ben Lyon would like to ask if you could share a little bit more info about autonomy and to link it with people. So what does that actually mean?
Autonomy means, in the general description, it's you feel like you have a say in what you do and how you do it. You play a role, you have some discretion. It's not someone handing you something and say, this is what needs to be done. And it can obviously be interpreted by different people in different ways. So what you see is when I do this in workshops, I ask people to put like 3 terms they see for autonomy on Post-its and put it on the wall, or for belonging, or for competence. So in a group of 60 people, of 20 people, you then have 60 slides for each: autonomy, belonging, and competence. What you see is the words might be different, but there are usually 2 or 3 or 4 themes that crystallize out of all of these Post-its. And it's having options, I don't like the word because it's liberal and it's politics, but a lot of people put in freedom. So they want to have some leeway. They don't want to be boxed in completely. But autonomy is probably the most misunderstood term, because most people think in organizations, when you give people autonomy, they do what they want. And that is not true. Cultures have different degrees of autonomy. I give an example here from Lux Airport here in Luxembourg. They had a very controlling CEO for many years that signed off on any pen, any piece of paper, any coffee machine. So it was a very controlling environment and people did not have a lot of autonomy. What does that mean? Well, there was a lot of fear going on in the organization to do something wrong. And before doing something wrong, you don't do anything at all. So it was like very disengaged, do as you're told environment. In 2014, Johan van Este, who is a Dutch Belgian, became the CEO, and he had a totally different personality. Liberal arts, education, he was open, he was friendly. He wanted to give power to the people and they should create their own solutions and so on. So from one day to the other, he came in and said, okay, go for it. What happened? Nothing. Because people were so used, the culture was so much on being controlled that you need to teach people how to behave in an autonomous way, that they could have a life at work and not just do as they are told, because there was no one to tell them. So you had to teach them to take initiative, to have a say, because when they had workshops asking people to contribute, they wouldn't say anything because they were not supposed to. So you had to teach them to speak up and contribute. Sorry.
Thank you. So the ABC vitamin approach seems a little bit touchy-feeling, and autonomy, belonging, and competencies mean different things to different people. Are there any sub-drivers that are more often mentioned? And how would you rank or define the drivers by importance?
You cannot categorize them by importance. Each of them has the same level of importance. If you have a deficiency in A or B or C, what automatically happens is that you're switching from the executive brain to the instinctive brain. Because if your autonomy is missing, you feel captured, you feel closed in. If your belonging is missing, you feel like you're not supported. If your competence is missing, you feel incompetent and feel like you got nothing to contribute, and that the group might abandon you shortly because you've got nothing to contribute. So any of those three make you feel unsafe and trigger uncertainty and trigger your instinctive brain and all the behaviors that come with it. So there's no category. Any one missing triggers the instinctive brain. Your question on sub-drivers is an interesting one. The ABC is the most fundamental level. It's the most basic level. So there's nothing underneath. There are no sub-drivers. But everything we talk about in organizational life that we think is desirable is driven by those three factors. So these three factors are driving all four: trust, engagement, low turnover, low absenteeism, better health, higher resilience. So those three are the drivers. So there are no sub-drivers. They are the most fundamental drivers there are. So if you are in an organization and you want to get all these things right, you can obviously start from a practical perspective. You can look at all these things individually, or you have one common denominator. You look at the ABC. You measure the ABC. You intervene at levels where you push the ABC. And when you push the ABC, you automatically push all the desirable behaviors in an organization, and you delete or eradicate undesired behaviors. But it takes time. I mean, in my study that I did, it took a year to train people in the ABC. And what we saw was that we could increase, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think autonomy by 15%, belonging by 17 or 18%, and competence by a couple of percentages. Overall, we decreased, through these increases in ABC, we decreased absenteeism by 25%, engagement by 15%, and trust by so and so much. So we saw all these second order effects, but the ABC is the basic level.
Another question from the audience. How do you measure ABC, and how often should you measure it, and what do you do with the results?
Yeah, good question. Measuring ABC is like going to the doctor and having a blood test. It takes about the same time. It's a questionnaire. There are shorter questionnaires and longer questionnaires. The shortest version I use has 9 items. The longest version, the original version from 19-something, has 28 items. And actually, if you want to measure your own ABC and you're interested in the approach, here's a website which you may want to use, www.checkabc.lu. It's got a free survey which you can use with 28 questions. It goes into a database and it gives you some feedback, some benchmarking on your scores and some advice how you score in the organizational context. So you can measure it through this questionnaire. It's quite effective. It's actually quite interesting to see how stable the ABC is for people over time. Obviously, you have fluctuations during the day. In terms of how often you measure it, let me ask you this. If I'm in the office of a CEO and I'm asking the CEO, how is your financial performance doing today? How are your accounts today? What does the CEO do? He just goes to his computer, pushes a button, and you see the up-to-date accounts for the day that just roll out the printer. If I ask the same CEO, how are your customers doing today? How do your clients score your company? He just goes to the computer, hits a button, and the most recent survey and client results and talk walker results and whatever roll out the printer. What happens if I asked the CEO, how are your people doing today? He could go to the computer, hit the button, and he could give me the number of employees, their ages, their salaries, and everything else. But he would be no way that he could tell me how the employees feel. Now, let me ask another question. The people flying, there are not so many people flying today, but let's assume there were more people flying again. And you came to Lux Airport and you were about to board a plane. And at the door, it says, attention, this plane only measures altitude, position, and speed every 3 hours. Would you get on board of that plane? No, you wouldn't. But we are expecting employees to go through the doors to the entrances of all these companies out there who, if we are lucky, measure how the most important asset in their company, the last sustainable competitive advantage, does, if we're lucky, once a year. There are some companies who do it once a quarter, but I think from my perspective, we need to measure it on a daily basis. Now, some of you might say, oh, whoa, wait a second. Measuring it on a daily basis, I mean, people don't have time to do this on a daily basis, questionnaires and everything. No. You can actually quite simply implement it by, let's assume you're asking one question a day. Every morning someone opens the computer, there's one question, one on A or one on B or one on C. And you have sort of a weather report or you have a statistic over the company on this one question. If you do it that way, you're transparent and you can spot any problems in your organization immediately. So let's say you have an issue in one department with autonomy, you're asking another autonomy question the next day. And if it's still negative, you're asking another autonomy question. 3 negatives in a row, you go and talk to the department and the people in the department. If you do it once a year, it takes you, let's say, 3 months to get the results. Then you sit around the table, discuss it. Then it might take another 3 months. So you have, let's say, 18 months from the time people fill out the survey till you actually get cracking. That's too much time in a dynamic time like ours. So you need to measure how people feel in your organization on a continuous basis. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And then the next question is, what do you do with the results? The ABC is a navigator, it's a compass. It's not giving you solutions. So what you need to do with the ABC is you need to go to the department or the group or the team and say, does that actually reflect how you feel about your team? Okay, then let's sit down, let's talk. What are the potential solutions for this? What are your ideas? You have to include people. They are the solution, they are not a problem. And as a manager or even as a CEO, I don't have any insights into a team. or a department or even a business unit, I can give you some corporate rules and regulations, but for the team, the rules should be determined by the team themselves within the framework of the corporate rules.
Question from the audience. Does an ABC culture need to be driven from the top of the organization? And if so, what advice do you have for CEOs and leadership teams to become credible ABC role models?
Yes, good, very good question. If you want to implement the ABC in an organization for the culture, for people to ABC each other in the organization, it needs to be supported by senior management. I'm not saying it should be driven by the top. I think ABC is driven from bottom up, but it needs to be supported because there will be resistance in the organization. There are always people who don't, like they talk about the fluffy stuff. So the hardcore stuff is numbers, machinery, real estate, but everything related to people and feelings is the fluffy stuff. So why would we want to get involved with that? And in order to overcome that resistance, which is usually in the middle management, you need support from the top. I'll give you an example. I worked with a large organization here in Luxembourg, and we did the ABC, did a survey and everything else. And the employees, the delegation, everyone was fired up and they really wanted to go for it and wanted to do it. But there were two middle managers of that 7 business units, strategic business units. There were 2 heads of 2 business units very strongly opposed to the effort. And it became a very controversial discussion in the executive committee. And it got to the point where the executive committee had to take a decision on whether those 2 would be overruled, maybe even replaced over time, or whether everything would be scrapped, the whole work. And at that point in time, the CEO turned to his CFO and said, it's a company with several thousand employees. Said to his CFO, don't we have somewhere, I understand from the numbers that our employees, the well-being is down, they're not feeling well, and so on and so forth. Aren't there somewhere 10,000 euros in the budget so that we can do something good for our employees? And that was the end of it. If he had said, we really want to go for it, we see this as a solution to our issues and the strategy for the future, then it would have been implemented. So it's driven by bottom up, because you cannot drive it top down in terms of determining what is ABC in teams and between people. They have to solve it themselves. The ABC is a framework. It's like a truck, and the truck might be the same. The framework might be the same for people, but what they put on the truck, the load, might be different for every team.
Interesting. Thank you. One other question. All organizations want to link employee engagement to business results, meaning higher retention, lower absenteeism, etc. Yet there are some intangibles that are difficult to measure. And what are the main criteria to keep in mind, and what is actually being measured, and how do you calculate the ROI on investing in human capital?
Oh, that's a big question. Let me try to trim it down. What has been measured so far, and that's why people intervention projects have received very low approval rates in executive committees, is what can be measured from accounts is, for example, absenteeism rates. But when you look at the value that's being captured by reducing absenteeism through increasing engagement, in the study I did, we also measured absenteeism, and the decrease in absenteeism accounted for only 15% of the entire value captured by the increase in engagement. So if you go to an executive committee and just propose an employee intervention just by reducing absenteeism, for example, you're completely underselling yourself, because the benefits of increasing engagement are usually 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 times what you achieve through the decrease the value of absenteeism. You can obviously go ahead and try to measure all these positive things. But I mentioned there have been now 50,000, more than 50,000 research articles on the, or ABC related research articles out there. There is hardly any outcome, even in the organizational context, be it manufacturing, be it scrap, be it health and well-being, be it resilience, be it retention, whatever you want. Everything has been measured and somehow linked to the ABC. So what you do is you measure the ABC, and you know that when the ABC is going up, you know that all the other positive things are going up. Now, you obviously need to give your executive committee for decision making a number. And this is why the ABC framework uses those 3 layers I talked about earlier. You categorize people on the ABC, and there's a scale of doing that, into people who basically create more value than they cost in terms of their salary plus all the social costs related to it, which is roughly, in a developed country like Luxembourg, it's roughly 2 times the salary. And they create more than these 2 times the salary, whether they create roughly the same, or they destroy because they're not living up to this salary, or they're even destroying because you have actively, what Gallup calls actively disengaged people. Those are the ones spreading rumors, being negative, spreading negative emotions and so on, which is negative for the entire organization. So you can categorize people in those 3 categories through the ABC. And by linking it to the salary, you have an economic indicator. And all you need to do is to show how you're moving people through increasing the ABC. You're moving people from the lower categories to the higher categories. And that gives you a value, and that gives you a return on investment. To give you an idea, in the study I did, we spent roughly 500,000 euros on 2 major cost blocks you have when you do ABC interventions. One is a consultant or facilitator to run the ABC intervention. The second block of cost is time that the employees spend in these coachings, working sessions, and trainings. And that equated to roughly 500,000 for a group of, God help me, I think it was 180 or 190 people. And when we measured the ABC and the increase and equated it with how we move people from the lower levels to the higher levels of engagement, we generated a value of 780 or 790,000, and that gave us the 150%.
Interesting. Well, thank you. We couldn't answer all the questions from the audience. I hand over to Sarah.
Actually, my internet's restored and I am back.
Okay.
So just very quickly, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marcus. I've taken lots of notes. People are the last competitive advantage. That's something that came up in the chat. If you lose any of the 3 vitamins, if you're missing any of them, then you automatically go into the instinctive brain. And we're not paying enough attention to our most important resource. And as you were talking, I was thinking that there are some leaders that are doing really, really well throughout these last few months, and there are some leaders that really are not. And I'll just single one out. James Timpson in the UK, I think in the very first week of the COVID shutdown, he said to all his staff, "We will not fire anybody. You will all be safe, no matter how long this goes on." Wow, which I think is probably an example of communication like you were talking about.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Marcus. I'm going to hand to Sarah, who's just going to close the meeting for us. Thank you.
You're on mute.
I'm on mute, sorry. Thank you very much, Jill, and thank you very much, Marcus. That was really engaging, and actually my head is spinning. There's so much to think about. And yes. I do see a theme emerging. I do see on Monday, Simon Anholt talked about collaboration. Boris Diekman yesterday spoke about leading from the heart. You today are talking about the ABC vitamins, and that all shows that there's a trend very much towards, you know, people engagement and working together and being there for people. So thank you for that. That was great. Just a very quick shout out. So tomorrow, as you can see up here, Paulette Leonard's timing has changed to 7 p.m. I did mention earlier, but some might have joined a bit later. She is going to be talking to us what she learned as a leader over the last few months. If you remember, she was kind of thrown in the deep end as our new health minister. So she will be sharing her experiences and how she has dealt with that whole situation from a leadership point of view. And then on Friday, we have Margaret Heffernan, 11 a.m. in the morning. She will be talking about what organizations need to do when nothing is certain, which is definitely the case at the moment. And in fact, the title of her new book, Uncharted, is what inspired us to run this leadership forum under this kind of title. So we're very much looking forward to those last two speakers. So please, please, please join us. It would be great to see you there again, and keep all the energy and the great questions going. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, and have a lovely evening or afternoon. Goodbye.